Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Sharon Milgram, and today's webinar is Picking a Perfect Graduate Program. It's my thoughts about finding a good fit, a little bit about the application process, because we'll be going into much more detail about that as the summer progresses. I want to welcome all of you to the webinar. A couple of reminders. There's handouts in the handouts box. You can download those right now to follow along, but you don't need to worry. If you quit and forget to pull out the handouts, you'll be getting an email from us with an attachment, so no big deal. You'll be able to access the handouts later. Second thing, this will be taped. It is being taped now, and you can access the tape in a day or two on the NIH OITE YouTube channel. If you have issues with sound or your slides progressing, it's likely an issue of bandwidth. Close everything else that you have open on your computer or phone. If it still doesn't work, quit and re-sign up, and hopefully it will work. I have some OITE staff members with me, Dr. Chen and Dr. Lugo Escobar, and they'll let me know if it's a problem on my end, and we'll fix it quickly. But in all likelihood, you just quitting and restarting will take care of it. I will take questions at the end. Please wait to put questions into the chat box so you don't ask questions about things that I've actually covered. And I have left a lot of time for questions, and I'm very committed to making sure that we answer all your questions. In fact, we are so committed to making sure we answer all of your questions that we're going to host a graduate school Q&A July 14th at 11 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. And so you'll be able to log on and just throw questions at us, and a whole group of us from the OITE will be there to answer. So I want to start by this. Many of you remember this already. That's Teo, our dog. And you know, he's a rock star. So we've actually been playing around with the filters on our phone and have a new picture for you all to see. He's a big barker, and he's really sorry about it, and he wishes you all well, and he'll do his best. He has a bone right now, so hopefully he'll be quiet. But just in case there's barking, I'll unplug the laptop and move to a quiet place, but hopefully we'll be okay. I do think he's really super famous, has a fan club. I should probably open him a Twitter account. He has learned a lot of career development in the last 4 months, so he is really ready for all kinds of STEM careers. So I want to start by addressing the elephants in the room. And actually, I'll just, as an aside, tell you I took this picture myself in Wangay National Park off of my iPhone, so no big fancy camera. This was a really special moment in the middle of our safari, and there were dozens of elephants, but I caught these two up close. So there's some big elephants in the room right now. Right here we are talking about grad school in the future, and we're in the midst of a pandemic. We're in the midst of unrest. We're in the midst of an intense, difficult discussion around violence against people of color, against Black men. We are seeing increases in anti-Asian hate speech as a result of the pandemic. The honest truth is we're in a really, really hard time. The infection rate is going up right now, and we're all sort of sitting in the midst of this huge uncertainty. And it's really, really hard to plan for the future in the midst of uncertainty. But one of the things that is so important during this time is that we keep moving forward. We keep doing the work to attend to what we hope is coming next. And so I think that before I start talking about graduate school, I need to spend a moment and talk about how this whole experience might impact graduate schools and graduate school admissions in some way. And I guess I'll start by saying none of us have the superpower of mind reading. I know we wish we did. I know we often try to predict the future, and we really can't predict the future. But I think it is really safe to say that this admission season will be characterized by many more virtual activities. recruitment events, pre-interviews, possibly even interviews. It's depending on what happens. You may have your entire grad school interview via Zoom, right? Recruitment events will most likely, most certainly be virtual. In fact, we have a big virtual recruitment event coming up in a few weeks that I'll be talking about. And so the more you gain comfort with being on Zoom, with connecting via Zoom, with figuring out how to communicate in a really direct, clear way over Zoom, the more this process is going to unfold for you in a comfortable way. I think it is likely to say that budget constraints could impact the number of offers made. While we don't really have any mental model of what happens for graduate recruiting during a pandemic or post-pandemic, we do have models for what happens during graduate admissions in the face of very serious economic times, because the economic collapse in 2008 provides us with some type of model. And based on that, and based on previous times where budgets were very tight, there was an impact on the number of offers made. And so that means some strategy as you're planning what to do. I also think those are two things that are a little bit stress-inducing maybe, but I want to put out something positive. And that is that graduate program leadership are already talking about the challenges that all of you are facing right now. They are talking about ways to make sure those challenges don't get in your way. And so I think it's safe to say that all graduate programs understand lost internship opportunities, lost research opportunities, the fact that maybe you were scheduled to present at a meeting and that meeting got canceled. And so there's going to be understanding about all of this. And finally, I think it's safe to say that everything that you can do to stay productive during this difficult time, for signing up for virtual journal clubs, to presenting your work at virtual meetings, to taking a course online to learn a new research skill, to engaging thoughtfully with the science around the pandemic, right? Using this as an opportunity to learn a little bit about public health, a little bit about virology, a little bit about vaccines. Everything that you can do to stay productive and engage with the scientific community will be viewed very favorably by members of the admissions committee. We've had an evolving discussion in graduate admissions about how do we find students who are resilient, students who can deal with the inevitable setbacks that are a part of graduate education, that are a part of being in science. How do we find resilient students? And in many, many ways right now, you are all working to build your resilience. And the fact that you're logged in here today shows that you get that, right? That you need to be focused on something positive moving forward. And so you're showing the admissions committee that you are already developing the resilience they're looking for. And so I know it's easy right now to get caught in some catastrophizing about lost opportunities. And quite frankly, there's a lot to be sad about and angry about. Grief is a normal emotion during something like this. I just want to help you pause when you find yourself caught in that kind of either negative emotion and negative thinking. I want to give you an appreciation that we are actually noticing the efforts that you're making to be productive right now. We understand the challenges, and it's going to be factored in as we talk to applicants moving forward. So I've been involved in graduate admissions for a long time, first through running programs at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and now in my capacity as the director of the Office of Intramural Training and Education, and we have oversight for the NIH Graduate Partnerships Program. I talk a lot to people in graduate admissions, and so what I'll be doing today is laying out my own personal thoughts about how you should map out this great journey that you're on, but also pointing out consensus in the field where I think all graduate directors would agree, and I'll be basing my comments on my long experience in the field. And so hopefully you'll find this helpful. We will spend quite a bit of time answering questions at the end. And so with that introduction about the pandemic, I actually want to use this slide as a transition from the perspective of these are really unique times and these are difficult times to so how do I manage the stress that I have around all of that? And maybe the most important thing that I've learned since the start of the pandemic is summarized here in this slide. And this comes from some of the OITE wellness advisors and those of you who have been in some of our stress management and wellness webinars. Those of you who've participated in some of the resilience program have seen this. And the honest truth is that there are a lot of things in life that we really cannot control. And some things we don't really care about controlling or not, right? I don't care to control what colleagues at work have for lunch, or you know, what they think about our schedule for ending early someday. I'm happy if they are engaged and take advantage, but if they don't, it's okay. I can't control it. When it comes to the pandemic, you know, there's a lot of things we can't control. How it's going to affect admissions, like I already talked about, there could be some pretty big impacts. We can't control canceled internships or other lost opportunities. We really can't control how long universities stick with remote learning. There's some things that we really can't control. And like I said, there are some things we don't care about controlling. Where stress comes in is where we wish to control something we really have no control over. So yeah, you can write a letter and say, are you sure you need to cancel that internship? You can, you know, voice your concern about enough slots in graduate admissions, but the honest truth is these are things we really wish we could control that we really can't. If, however, we turn to this third circle, what we can control, then we really can manage our stress. Our stress comes from that yellow circle, the things we wish to control that we can't. So here are the things you can control. Putting energy into looking for schools, being very broad and open-minded in your search, putting energy into preparing a strong application. Those are two things that you have a lot of control over. You have some downtime this summer. There are people to help. There are webinars to help. There's going to be people you can talk with through the graduate and professional school fair, through other online mentoring activities. So you can put some energy into this. You can also attend to your education and career development. Think about what might worry you about the start of grad school. Maybe it's reading papers, maybe it's your public speaking skills, maybe you realize you should have some computational skills and you don't yet. And you have a chance right now to attend to those needs as creatively as possible online. So you have some things behavior-wise that you can control. You also can control your thoughts and behaviors around all of this. Not to say every day we're in total control of our catastrophizing mind or the stories we tell ourselves, but you can learn the science of resilience. You can learn how to look at your thoughts and behaviors and make positive choices. Every Wednesday, we host a webinar focused on resilience and wellness. We are in the second one of the series of 5 right now, and you are most welcome if you haven't been participating to hop on now. The last 2 are already taped and up on the YouTube channel. And while it seems sort of silly to say, well, I can focus on my resilience and how I take care of myself, the honest truth is that is the foundation for navigating stressful processes like this. And graduate education and graduate admissions is stressful under good circumstances. And so now we have stress on top of stress. So the more energy you put into how you approach this and how you take care of yourself through this process, the better the outcome. So to do well, we have to be well. And it's really an important mantra for you to remember. So the goal of today then is to start focusing on some of the things we can control, which is really preparing well for your eventual journey to graduate education. And so I want to start by giving you 3 questions. And my hope is that you will actually spend some time sitting at home tonight. Those of you who've heard me talk know that I spend a lot of time talking about journaling, and I hope that you'll go ahead and journal about these questions. Sometimes we go to graduate school for the wrong reasons, and that's when we really get in trouble. And so I want you to make sure you've really given some thought to why you want to go to graduate school, where you see yourself in the future, and what kind of graduate experience will you need to reach these goals. And so I'm going to pause here for a moment and sit quietly. I'd like you all to go ahead and type into the chat box a little bit, not a long story, because I want to get through a lot of people's input, but why do you want to go to grad school? You know, what do you see yourself doing in the long term? All right, so let's go ahead, pause for a moment, think that through, and then start sharing. So this is like in the classroom when I ask a question and I'm like, are people going to answer? But I'm really serious. Go ahead and type some things into the chat. I'm not going to call out your name. I'm just curious about why you want to go to grad school and where you see yourself. So I am not seeing anything. Natasha or Yewan, am I in the wrong chat box right now?
You have to look at the Q&A.
Oh, questions, not the chat. Thank you.
There's a lot of them, so you can read them.
Okay, to further develop your education. So that's a big, broad, general thing. Here's a much more specific. I want to address antibiotic resistance to be able to get the career I want in industry. I've done my homework and I've been told a PhD will be helpful. I've always loved school and learning, and so I don't want to miss out on an opportunity. I want to grow and expand my mind. I want to go to grad school so I can go to med school. I want to go to grad school to get my PhD, publish. I want to work on mental health. I don't think that what's being done is very good. I know there's more to life. I know there's something to get out of this. I want to make a difference in the world through the advancement of science knowledge. Here's somebody focusing on a career goal. I want to be a professor. I want to work in a biotechnology company, and a BS doesn't always suffice. I want to be a researcher, and I want to have a high-level position. I want greater knowledge of subjects. I want greater job opportunities. I think this degree will bring me higher pay. I'm interested in really doing extensive research. It's going to give me a chance to learn more. It's going to give me resources. So we're hearing all kinds of ideas out there. Some very focused on, I have an interest in this specific thing, med school, mental health, or antibiotic resistance or virology. Some that are much more focused towards, I want to make a difference. I want to mentor in the future. I want to learn how to ask questions. I love school. Why not do more? I want to address those broad comments and say that is a great place to start thinking about grad school, but it would be good to sit longer with these questions. And that's actually true for those of you who gave deeper, a little bit of a more focused question. Even there, you want to spend some real time thinking about, what exactly do I want to get out of graduate school? The honest truth is we could be a lifelong learner and not go to graduate school. And I want to say that we can most certainly get to medical school without going to graduate school first. And so it's worth really asking, is this the right path? I'm not trying to scare people away. In fact, I think graduate school is an incredible experience. But I do know that it's very hard to go through graduate school without a really clear understanding of why you've started this process. And I'm going to share for just a little bit what we know about graduate education right now. And the first thing comes from the advisory committee to the NIH director. And this is looking at career outcomes for PhD scientists. Now, I know some of you on this webinar might be interested in master's degrees, so these data won't exactly apply to you, but I know based on what I see here in the question box that lots of you are interested in PhDs. So here's what we know. Most PhDs do things beyond becoming a professor. So the proportion of PhDs that moved into tenured or tenure track faculty positions has dropped down to about 1 in 4 right now. It's probably more like 1 in 5 right now. And it'll be interesting for us to see how that number changes over time, because the honest truth is that the professoriate is somewhat aging and there should be some expansion and opening of opportunity, but still it's about 1 in 4 or 1 in 5. Also, over the last period of time, about decade or so, the percentage of biomedical PhDs in industry and government have remained relatively constant. So the categories where we see lots of growth in careers for PhDs are science-related careers that don't actually involve doing research. Things like science policy, technology transfer, science education, things like that. And as I promised, Teo was definitely going to complicate this a little bit. I did one this morning. He was also quite loud. So I'm going to move and hide from him and everything should be fine. So, if you look at those data, what they tell you is that you are preparing for a much broader range of careers than you might imagine. And I'm going to address that in the next slide a little bit. And so you really want to find a graduate program that helps you do that. The honest truth is many traditional graduate programs continue to really focus on preparing trainees for academic research positions, and you're likely to do many more things beyond that. And so that's the first thing to keep in mind about graduate education. Now, the second thing to keep in mind about this is that we know that students change their mind. So I love asking you that question, where do you think you're going to land? Because I think it really does help you make decisions about where to apply, and it helps you appreciate the link between the skills I'm going to use in the long term and what I want to find in my graduate program. So it helps you move beyond the science to think much more broadly. That said, the data suggest that most graduate students change their mind about careers within a year or two of starting graduate school for a couple of reasons, largely because as undergrads, you don't always get access to information about the full range of careers. In part, sometimes people realize that they thought they loved research and they did as an undergrad or as a postbac, but then they start looking at what it means to do that day in and day out for life and realize it's not for them. So there's a lot of reasons why people change their mind. But it's really a key concept that people do. And so you are looking for a graduate program that helps you develop science, professional, personal, and career skills, not just science skills, all right? If you develop science, professional, personal, and career skills, then you'll be set up for future success, regardless of how you define success. Whether you define success as a job in biotech, whether you define success as a teacher, whether you define success as somebody who uses research to address specific questions using specific models, whether you define success as integrating your love of research and your love of mentoring. If you find a graduate program that treats you like a holistic, whole human being, it will set you up for success. If you make this decision exclusively based on science, Here is the projects I want to do, right here at this university. Ignore everything else. If you take that narrow view, you really risk not being as prepared as you need to be. And I think of everything that I want you to hear today, it's that. Because it's really hard at the beginning of this process to know what's going to really excite you. It's really hard at the beginning of this process to know where all the hard spots are going to be. And so you want a program that is really there, ready to support you through all of this career exploration, all of this science development, all of the places where you're not feeling very resilient and could use some help. And so I know often students think I'm going to say, find a professor doing what you want, talk to them and go ahead. And I'm going to say completely the opposite. I'm going to say, think really broadly and holistically about what you're looking for. And hopefully as we move through the material today, you'll see some of that. So let's start now by talking a little bit about the next set of questions. After you really spend time on this, where might I want to go? What experience do I need? The next set of questions is, am I ready? And you want to think of a bunch of things: your academic preparation, your research skills. There's going to be way more reading of papers than you can imagine. And so you want to say, how am I doing with that? You want to think about your communication skills. Not to say all of these, these are things you're going to study and develop in grad school. So I'm not saying you need to ask yourself, have I really mastered these? But you want to ask yourself, have I mastered these enough to begin the graduate school process, or do I need a little bit of time to continue developing these skills? You want to make sure that you have a good understanding of career paths and expectations, because you don't want to be disappointed later and say, I didn't need this degree. You want to make sure that you have the time and stress management skills needed to succeed. It's an intense experience. Stress is all around us. You're pressed for time, lots of things to juggle, and so you want to make sure you're ready there. And then you want to make sure of your interpersonal skills, your resilience, your emotional intelligence, right? All of the things that we need to hold ourselves calm during really intense times, to engage in environments where there are going to be differences of opinion. Science is about getting hard critiques, right? So we want to make sure we're ready for all of that. And finally, you just went through an intense, or are in the midst of an intense undergrad experience. Maybe you're not ready yet to sacrifice those evenings out, those weekends, those long vacations, the ability to have a lot of fun. Maybe you're not ready for that quite yet. And then finally, you want to make sure that financially you are feeling prepared for this. I think that we want to make sure we understand the financial package that graduate schools offer. And so, you need to appreciate that while many students pay for an education, many graduate students are paid to get an education. That is especially true for people earning PhDs. Not as true, and often not true at all, for people working towards a master's degree. And so sometimes we have to really weigh in, am I at an okay place right now to do this? So lots of things. This is not in order of importance. You'll need to think about it for yourself. Then the next question is, what type of program? So for many of you, based on what I read in the chat, you are interested in a PhD or some other type of doctoral program. I want to be clear that there's a lot of language out there, particularly in the biomedical sciences, that people use around PhD programs. So you might hear the word, we offer an umbrella program, or we offer a program that's interdisciplinary in nature. Generally, those two words mean that these are programs where you can rotate in with faculty members in multiple different departments. So let's think about something like cancer biology. There are people in the genetics department who study cancer biology, cell biology department. Maybe it's a cancer of the brain. So they're in the Department of Neuroscience. And so science doesn't follow borders of departments, and so therefore many PhD programs allow you to move around from department to department. And there are a variety of models about that. And so when you're talking to representatives of programs, you'll need to ask them, what exactly does your umbrella program mean? Now, there are programs that are department-based, and that is a program housed within a department. You choose to do the pathology graduate program, and you have to choose rotations and mentors within that department. There are reasons to choose umbrella or interdisciplinary programs. There are reasons that you might choose a department-based program. There is not one right or wrong approach in all of this, but you do want to understand what the structure is. So that's the first thing. Now, for some of you, you might be interested in an MD PhD program to become a physician scientist. Then you want to know about that program, whether it is funded by the NIH, in which case it is called a medical scientist training program, or MSTP, or whether it is funded in some other way. And you'll hear people say, we don't have an MSTP or a non-MSTP program. And we'll have some activities at the grad fair about MD PhD programs. Lots of students are actually interested in public health degrees or masters in public health. Some are interested in a master's of public health, considering perhaps eventually getting a PhD in public health. And there are a variety of sub-disciplines in the School of Public Health. Sometimes I talk to students who tell me that they're looking for a microbiology department, and then as they start talking about what they want, it's pretty clear to me that they might fit better in a public health department or public health school. And so you want to make sure that you understand all the sub-disciplines of public health, understand MPH programs. There's a great website linked here, What is Public Health? And there's also an old video cast that we made at NIH a few years back about careers in public health. I suspect that the pandemic is awakening in many people an interest in exploring public health degrees. And the honest truth is, I've seen some real increase in interest in that over my years at NIH. Now, sometimes people start to look at their options and they realize, actually, I want to work at the interface of science and management. I didn't get a chance to read everything that people were interested in, but some people said, I want to start a business, and so I want to get a PhD, or I want to be in a biotech company helping with drug discovery, but maybe not doing research. So there are careers at the interface of science and management, and these are called professional science masters, and you can learn something about these here. People commented about how, well, a PhD is just the highest degree and it will help me do many things. And there is some absolute truth to that. But sometimes we can get very, very far with a professional science master's. And depending on who you are and your circumstances and what you want to do, it might be well worth your time to take a look at these. Sometimes we feel pressured by our teachers or the program that we were in as an undergraduate. We said we were interested in graduate school, so now I have to apply. My teacher said, oh, you're so good at research. Well, I don't want to let him or her down. I just want to stress that those are terrible reasons to go to graduate school, that it is your life, that regardless of who it is encouraging you to do this, you should really think carefully here about what you want to do and what kind of program would be right for you, and explore broadly, not just do what people say, oh, here's what I did, here's what I think you should do. And I really, really want to stress that. Now, often students get to the end of this part and they say, I need more time, right? Sharon asked these questions, and the honest truth is, I'm not so ready to answer them right now. Or Sharon talked about, am I willing to sacrifice? And I'm not so sure I am. I think that it is completely reasonable to take time to get ready, or just to take time to have a break, to take time to explore, Not only do I think it's completely reasonable, I actually think it's an excellent idea. I think that taking time to do a research-oriented postbac can be such a critical step on your way to graduate school. Notice I said research-oriented postbac, not a classroom-based, class-based postbac. So this is where you would work in a research lab for a substantial amount of time. The NIH sponsors postbacs at the NIH. That's called the Postbac ERDA program. That's sponsored out of the OITE, and if you visit our website, you can learn more about it. The NIH also sponsors postbac programs at a university. The institute that sponsors that is the National Institute of General Medical Sciences, and those are called PrEP programs. Those are at universities. The NIH postbac program is on one of our campuses, whether that be the main campus near DC or one of our other campuses. On our YouTube channel is a talk about the postbac program. You know, data shows that a fair number of postbacs who come to NIH change their mind in that year or two that they're there. Some decide, yes, I still want a PhD, but I realize that it's in something totally different. I had a student who worked in my lab who was talking about wanting to be a cell biologist and do protein trafficking. That's why he worked in my lab. And at the end of 2 years, he said, I'm going to do computational biology. And he just reached out to ask how I was doing during the pandemic and to share his career search news. And, you know, he's really working almost exclusively now in computational areas. And so the postbac can be a real time of scientific growth. Some people decide they don't want to get a PhD. They want some other degree. So one of my postbacs started out, I'm going to get a PhD, and ended up in law school, and she does educational law. And so it can be a real chance for you to think things through, to experience science full time, to get a sense of what the intensity is like. You also can work as a technician. It's best if you work as a technician if your boss will support your scientific and professional development. And by that I mean, will they let you go to seminars? Will you present at lab meeting? Could you possibly go to a meeting with them to present a poster? If there's a workshop or webinar on graduate admissions and you say, hey, can I have 2 hours off? Are they going to say, you bet, because I know that's where you want to head. So you want a boss that's going to be supportive if you work as a technician. And one thing you might consider is working somewhere where you might like to go to school. This is a tried and true strategy used by many, especially if you have struggled a bit in the admissions process and you're reapplying, and that happens for many, including me. And so I just want to stress that one can get in a second time and really excel. It's no big deal. Might feel like a big deal in the moment though. But especially if you've had some struggles, working somewhere where you might like to go to school is an incredible strategy. People get to know you and they see you way beyond your GPA, which was lower, or whatever else was an issue in your application. Finally, sometimes people look at their record and say, I didn't take a lot of the science classes that I now need for what I want to do. My undergraduate major was one thing, my interests have evolved. The choice of classes depends on your undergraduate record. I just want to stress that classes without solid research is not as useful. And if you are deciding to take classes to get a master's en route to a PhD, you need to ask yourself if that is worthwhile. Many students go directly into PhD programs since you get paid for a PhD, but pay for a master's. It's not always a wise decision to do a master's first. However, if you think that all I need is a master's, then that's a perfectly reasonable strategy. So I'm not saying don't get a master's. I'm just saying be certain that a master's is the appropriate way before you make a decision. So a lot of things to talk about in terms of getting ready. Questions to ask yourself, things to think about, jargon to understand. So now we're going to dive in and talk a little bit about what to consider in choosing programs. And Yewan or Natasha, let me tell you, I moved away from Teo and I do not have a watch. So I'm going to need you to periodically give me a time, what time it is. All right.
Okay.
Thank you. So some things to consider. First of all, the structure of programs differ. In some, you do 3 rotations before you choose a mentor. In other programs, you have to choose a mentor and match with that mentor at the beginning. So the mentor selection process can really vary. Many students like the idea of rotations, making sure the environment works for me. It's more than just the science. It's what's the culture of that environment, how supportive is that mentor, and it's very hard to tell that just by meeting with somebody at an interview. And so many people prefer rotations, but some don't like a required number. They want more flexibility. You need to think it through, but you also just need to be aware that that can differ. Another place where there can be really big differences among programs is required coursework. Maybe there's no coursework. Maybe there's required number, but you get to choose. Maybe every first-year student takes the same core curriculum. Again, one is not necessarily better than the other, but without a doubt, you'll have a different first-year experience based on that, and so you want to know what the structure is. Some programs have a teaching requirement, and some that teaching requirement is very large and it has a great impact on the timing with which you can do research. In some, you have to teach to get paid. In some, you just have to teach to meet a requirement. You don't want to be surprised as things move on. And then there are some important things like, what's my stipend? And is there any other compensation? Will I be provided with health insurance? Will I need to buy it? What is the actual stipend going to be? Is it a 9-month stipend and I have to teach all summer? Or is it a school of medicine and it's a 12-month stipend? And so you want to be able to ask questions like that if you can't find the information on the website. And then finally, one thing is how a program is structured often plays into a little bit how much attention they pay to controlling the time to degree. So while I certainly don't think we want to run through graduate school having no extra experience or pausing to enjoy things along the way, we also don't want to take the very long, slow road to our PhD. This is a training period and we want to get trained, develop skills, and move on. And so you want to ask questions about how they structure their program to help you move along. Another thing, and I started with this and I'm going to stress it again, you want to focus on developing you as a whole person. Your science, your professional skills, your career skills, and your personal skills. So are there coordinated programs to help you with that? Are there writing courses, public speaking courses? Are there opportunities for you to do internships or other training opportunities? Maybe you can explore industry careers. For those of you who said, I think I'm doing this to land in industry, could you do a summer internship in industry, a rotation in industry, or even possibly work in industry for a part of your PhD? So many of you put in that you want to teach. So what is the teaching opportunities like? And what is the pedagogy training? Meaning, are there courses to teach you how to be a good teacher, right? It may feel a little bit like an innate skill. Well, I love it and I just will get good at it. There's theories of pedagogy. There are theories about the classroom. There's information to learn. So is that available? If you have this strong drive to become a teacher and you go to a school that doesn't think that's important, there's no training, and there are very few teaching opportunities. And in fact, PIs say, well, why would you waste your time on that? Then you're going to be really unhappy. And I think that it's important to develop some type of teaching skills in grad school because it's sort of a universal skill. Whatever you're going to do later, the ability to communicate and teach is important. So you want to know about those opportunities. You know, I think if ever there was a time to pause for a moment and make sure that the school and program you're looking at has a strong commitment to building a welcoming and inclusive community, it would be now. People need to feel supported. People need to be seen and valued and heard for who they are. Not, you know, we don't see race and we leave all those personal things at the door, you know, color, we don't see that, right? We want to be at a place that genuinely says, well, we have work to do to make this completely welcoming, but we're doing that work, and we'd like to build the community that is as diverse as possible. You also want a strong commitment to student wellness. The data coming out about anxiety and depression in graduate students is one of the most alarming data sets that I read these days. And we know that a part of that is the lack of support for graduate education, because the data show that supportive mentors and an infrastructure to help makes a big difference. So you want to make sure that when you're talking to schools, you ask about their wellness program, about their diversity programs. Do you have affinity groups for students? Do you support student wellness activities? You also want career counseling access. So if they say, oh, that's for your postdoc, they're wrong. Career development starts in graduate school. It may start in graduate school with just an occasional attendance at a career panel or career event, but as you move along in graduate school, you will want more and more access to career advising. And so you want to make sure the school provides it. And you also want to make sure that they are really paying attention to your graduate experience. So a little bit like that bullet about attention to controlling time to degree. You also want to pay attention to the diversity of the students, the faculty, and the broader community. Right? I already said we need to go to work every day and be seen and valued and heard for who we are. We want to make sure the institution and department is actively engaging in building a welcoming and inclusive community. And we want to make sure there are student affinity groups and learning communities that are focused on diversity and inclusion. You know, one of the things that comes up again and again as I talk to students about wellness and resilience is the need to find safe spaces to talk, or relatively safe spaces to talk. People acknowledge that at school it can be very, very hard to find a completely safe space, but we want to have places where we can go and talk about what's going on for us and feel that we are surrounded with people who are working towards similar goals that we are. And so student affinity groups and learning communities are really important. And then finally, we want to think about geography and cost of living. And I cannot stand it when people say you should be prepared to go anywhere, find the best science and go there. There is best science all over the place. And if you need to be in a certain geographic area because of your family, that's fine. If you need to be in a certain geographic area because of the needs of your partner or spouse or kids or cost of living, that's fine. You should be able to live where you want. There is no one great place to go to graduate school. There are many great places to go to graduate school. I want to make a comment about family. I always joke that we have to draw a circle around the family and decide, do I need to live in that circle or outside of that circle? Do I need to be a little far away because it's very draining and tiring? And while I love them and want to support them, I also need some space so that I can really focus on my graduate education. And some of us need to live closer. We say, I need to be able to get home, and I need to be able to do that by driving, or I need to be able to do that, on just a quick weekend, right? So geography matters, and it's absolutely fine to factor that in. Now, finally, one other thing to consider is the program climate, the morale, and student satisfaction. This is a tough time. Graduate school is always a tough time. And so I want to really stress that there are programs putting energy into their climate and morale, and there are programs that say, this is about science. So you want to find a program that really values their students and is putting energy into supporting them. Now, to get a full picture, you can read websites, right? I mean, if they list a whole bunch of student groups and there are active, events listed, that that's for real. If there's a list of wellness events and a link to the university wellness calendar, that tells you something. They should list outcomes for their graduate students. They should have policies about time to degree. So you can get some picture by reading websites. You can also do informational interviews, and by that, I mean that you talk to current students or alumni to learn about the school, and obviously, eventually, you have to talk to representatives to see, does the website look like what I hear from the faculty members or program directors I'm talking to? Does what the students say jive with what I'm seeing the faculty talk about? So those are a lot of the things for you to consider. Now, if you notice, I have yet to talk about the quality of the science at the department or institution, and that does not mean that I don't think that matters. I actually do think that it matters, but I think these other things tend to get overlooked. And so I like to come up with and hit on this after I hammer home some of the other things. So a couple things to think about in terms of the quality of the department and the institution. Are there core facilities with cutting edge technologies that you want to learn? Do they have the infrastructure and quality lab spaces that you need? Are the right support services there and educational infrastructure? Maybe you want to do translational work. Is there access to a clinical research center, right? Maybe you want to do crystallography, and what's my ability to do that at this institution? So sort of what infrastructure is there for both research and education? Another example, an example of educational infrastructure, is there a center for teaching and learning? Because if there is, then your chances of developing your teaching skills just went up. And so you want to look at infrastructure pretty broadly. And then you want to look for signs of research excellence, funding, publications, and awards, right? So are people going to meetings, presenting, publishing? What kind of grant funding does this school and program have, etc. Now, I want to talk about one particular type of programming called, a type of funding called an institutional training grant. This is a grant to a university, and it is given by an institution like the NIH or the NSF or the Howard Hughes Medical Institution, and it is given to the institution to enhance their graduate or postdoc training opportunities. This means that a set of experts in education came to campus, read an in-depth application before they arrived, talked to students, talked to faculty, looked at programs, and essentially endorsed the research and training enterprise. They essentially said, this looks like a really enriching place for people to go to graduate school. At the NIH, these programs are often called T32s or training grants. The NSF version of that is an IGERT. I don't actually know what that stands for, but you can Google and look. And I just want to point out that there is a type of NIH grant that was awarded years ago called a BEST grant for broadening experiences in scientific training. This was given to schools to promote career development activities, to expose students to the broader array of careers out there. The NIH is no longer funding BEST grants, but you might hear somebody tell you, oh, we have a BEST grant, our career development resources are excellent because we had that grant. There are also schools without a BEST grant who have excellent career development resources. So it's not the only thing you're looking for, but it's a nice thing if you hear about it. Now, sometimes you will be asked to apply to a T32 while you simultaneously apply to grad school. Other times you'll go on interviews and people will say, we just want to let you know we have a T32 in this area, but you wouldn't apply till your second year. All right, so you may hear people talk about them. You generally apply to the university and the program, and then they will give you information about training grants. The beauty of training grants is usually they come with some value added, meaning workshops, maybe a retreat, extra opportunities to expand your knowledge within your field. Also, sometimes they fund your stipend. And so you want to work with a PI who doesn't have money right then, who says, well, I can fund you in a year, but not right now. A school with training grants can sometimes really, really help with that. So I just want you to be familiar with training grants. Now that's some things about scientific excellence. Let's drill down now to your interests in specific, right? And you should do this knowing that your interests might change, but still, what do the core facilities look like? What does the research space look like? If I'm interested in clinical research, are there patient populations? If I'm interested in field work, is that something that the university and programs support? Are there experts in areas important to me? Yes, your interest might change, and my graduate experience is an example of how quickly that can happen. I went to study stroke, to do stroke research. I took one biochemistry class. I got introduced to hormone signaling in one 1-hour lecture, and it totally changed the trajectory of my science career. But still, if you have an interest, it's a great place to start. Many of you have very broad interests, like cancer biology or cell biology or computational approaches. And then you want to look in a variety of sub areas within that broad area. You want to make sure if you get to rotate before, that there's a number of mentors doing what you want to do, right? And you want to learn a little bit about their funding histories, their publication records, where they're at in the tenure process, if there's tenure at that university. And you want to find out if they're what their mentoring history is, if they're a great mentor or an absent mentor or a tour mentor. Graduate education doesn't work when you work in a lab that doesn't appreciate you. That doesn't mean every day will be easy. It just means that you work in a lab that appreciates that and provides the support you need. And so you don't want to just look at a school and say, bingo, there's somebody whose work really interests me, I'm going there. You really want to go back through these slides and look at all these other areas. So many, many things to keep in mind. This is a summary of this last bit of the talk. All kinds of important things. And these are not in any order of importance. You get to choose. For some, geography drives a large part of the search. For some, really certain that they want to look at translational research, finding a translational science program matters. That drives the search. For others, access to particular learning opportunities drives it. I really want to find a place that has some focus on industry careers. You get to choose. It's about great science, but it's about developing you as a whole person. And I just want to say one thing, beware of the prestige myth. Somebody tells you, oh, that's such a great, famous school. Prestige does not really take care of you day to day. And so I don't want you to make a decision based just solely on that. So how do you learn about schools and programs? Well, please join us at the Graduate and Professional School Fair. It's the first week in August. We have like some crazy number of schools who are participating, double what we ever have in Bethesda because it's virtual. So we have 300 plus schools participating. There'll be panel discussions. There'll be opportunities for you to talk with schools throughout that entire week. There probably are other virtual programs this summer and fall where you'll be able to look at schools. Don't use the US News and World Report rankings, please. They might be really misleading because they don't look at these factors, they look at other things, so it's not a useful way. You want to talk to your teachers and mentors, but remember their potential biases. Often we say, oh, I went to this school and loved it, you should go there too. There is nothing about the fact that they loved a school that indicates that you will love it as well. So we have potential biases, and you should really ignore what we have to say. Actually, maybe what I should say is you should take it with a grain of salt, okay? You can use the web and just Google cancer cell biology training programs, or just Google graduate programs in evolutionary biology, right? And you can spend some time just surfing the web, and maybe you're going to read a web page that totally grabs you, and then you're going to want to reach out to somebody and learn more, all right? And then finally, you can talk to peer mentors, alums of your school, programs that you did last summer, programs at your school. Talk to alum. If you're at NIH, we have an alumni database. Lots of our postbacks are in graduate schools all across the country. They love hearing from alum. Same thing at all other schools. So lots of ways to learn. I want to transition a little bit and wrap up and talk about admissions process, and a little bit about that. We'll really develop that over the course of other presentations this summer. But let's start a little bit and look at the admissions committee. So they can be very small, 5 people. They can be really large, depending on the size of the program. Umbrella programs have subcommittees, right? So they can be really quite large. They are generally chaired by a program director or the director of admissions. These generally are faculty members supported by high-level administrative staff who have quite a role in guiding the process. Applications are read in advance and discussed at meetings. Some programs, but not all, use rolling admissions. So if they say we use rolling admissions, that means they're regularly reviewing applications. Some wait until the deadline passes before they look at all, but that's what rolling admissions means. So obviously, if a school uses rolling admissions, it's advantageous for you to apply earlier in the process rather than later. A really key thing and a reason to be at the grad fair talking to people is program directors often have some discretion. So if a school says our GPA minimum is 3.3 and you have a 3.0, don't assume you will not get in. Talk to the program director, right? They have discretion. They can tell you, well, actually, we're looking for an improvement and a positive trajectory. They really can give you guidance about your application. The flip side of that is they are expected to be courteous and welcoming to everyone. So the fact that they give you time does not absolutely mean that they're waiting for you to apply. And so you want to ask hard questions, right? You don't want to just, well, they talked to me and they said, I look forward to you applying, and sort of overly interpret that positively. But you also don't want to do it the opposite way. Read a website and say, oh, they don't mean me, all right? Because they very well might mean you. We evaluate lots of things. Your academic record, that is not just what's this person's GPA, it's what hard classes did they take, it's what labs have they had, it's what foundational math, if that's relevant to the area you're heading to grad school, and it is for many, many areas. So it's not only what you've taken or what your GPA is, it's a combination of those things. We evaluate your research experience, and that really should be reflected in an outstanding research statement. Depending on the school, we evaluate standardized test scores. This is in flux, and I'll have a lot to say about that on the next slide. And we evaluate letters of recommendation. The views on the GRE are rapidly changing because there's data to suggest that GREs do not correlate, GRE scores do not correlate with success in graduate school. Some people really shine on the GRE, some people don't. It's often not a reflection of how hard people worked, how hard people studied. It has a lot to do with the nature of the exam. And so lots of schools have figured out that GREs don't predict grad school success. And so lots of schools have dropped the requirement for the GREs. If you do not know about a school or program, or you want to ask them, would it help me anyway? My GPA wasn't as good as I had hoped. Would this help? Give me some advice. You can email someone and make an inquiry. That's a great question to ask during the grad and professional school fair. Lots of website information is out there as well. I'm going to say some things about letters of recommendation because I know I'm going to get lots of questions about them. So typically 3 or 4 are required, and they are now almost always submitted online. Okay. It is rare for faculty to say, sure, here's a generic letter. You can have that and you can submit it a couple years from now. So if you did something in a summer and you're going to want to, or during the year, and you're going to want to ask someone for a letter a year or 2 down the road, you probably want to make an effort to keep in touch. You don't have to keep super in touch, like you don't need to send updates monthly, but probably every 6 months, maybe at the end of each semester, you want to reach out. I sometimes hear from somebody, it's been years, and I still will say yes, but I have to admit it's easier when people have kept a little bit in touch and updated me for me to make my letter feel a little bit more real and relevant in the moment. You know, still I say, you know, they worked with me 3 years ago, but here's my observation. But something about keeping in touch just makes it a little bit easier. You want to ask mentors and teachers who know you well and who know you in relevant areas. So if you have a minor in English or Spanish or sports medicine, those are fabulous minors. And teachers there might know you really well, but they might not know you in a way relevant to graduate school. So they might not know your research capabilities. If you're applying for graduate schools in the basic sciences, they won't know a lot about your persistence at the bench or your ability to understand controls. So sometimes a teacher knows you well, but they don't know you in relevant areas. I think one letter like that, a teacher who really knows your character and your hard work ethic and your seriousness about education, I think one letter like that is fine, but you want the other letters to be from people in relevant areas. You should ask far in advance. You should provide details. It is fine to ask a postdoc in your group or staff scientist that you worked with. All things being equal, it would be best if the PI of the lab either co-signed that letter or it was written by somebody who saw you every day and then given to your PI to add some things. All things being equal, it's better to have somebody who knows you in the research space and higher up in their level of experience, but postdocs are fine. It is also fine to get letters from undergraduate teachers who know you from labs, you know, organized class-based labs. That's fine as well. Letters of recommendation are thought to be good predictors of success, so be thoughtful about who you ask. If they ask you to write a letter yourself, you should talk with a mentor and get some support in doing that. If you're at NIH, you can ask me for an example or two of a strong letter. I find that students are way too humble in letters, and it's important to get some guidance. And I hope your mentors say that they'll write the letters for you, but I know that sometimes you get asked, and so I thought I would mention that. So you want to put your best foot forward. How do you prepare a strong application? And I'm not going to go through this slide. This is meant for you to spend some time journaling about and thinking about, because these are the kinds of things you need to address in your application. So I asked that big general, why do you want to do this at the beginning? And you all gave very broad answers, as you should. These questions are meant to pull you down deeper, to really think about what are areas of strength, what are my biggest accomplishments, where do I need to grow, why am I doing this, what obstacles have I overcome, and what does it tell you about me? This is your chance to really define who you are through the application process. And I know that so many times we start applying and we think, well, I'm not very special, and imposter fears creep in and we start to think everybody else is more prepared than we are. But the honest truth is, if you take a deep breath, center yourself, and do this exercise, it really helps you reflect on your strengths and what you bring to the table. So we're going to have a webinar next week or so on writing a personal statement. So I'm not going to talk about that. And what I want to do is leave a lot of time for questions. So I'm going to wrap up with a few things to consider. And the first is that you need to get advice along the way. It is rare for me to talk to someone who didn't get advice where everything worked out great. You are new to this experience. There's a lot of myth out there. There's a lot of pressure. People give advice sometimes based on their N of 1 experience. So you want to get advice along the way from people who do graduate admissions as part of their work responsibilities. That's why things like the grad fair are so important. And that's why it's important to go prepared and say, look, I want to talk to you about my record. Can you tell me what I need to do to be competitive here? The goal of your written application is to get an interview, and you should take that step very, very seriously, especially in going back to the beginning where I said there could be fewer slots, especially when there are fewer slots. We have to make hard decisions about who to interview and who not to interview. So you want to start your essays far in advance. You want to be really thoughtful in addressing the prompt. You want to put together a really meticulous application. So you can apply to too many schools and get overwhelmed, or too few schools and not give yourself enough options, depending on your willingness to reapply. And your geography. You might actually start with a restricted list. It's good to get advice from mentors as that process unfolds. And I want to encourage you to aim for a mix of reach schools, i.e., I think I may not get in here, but I might, and this would be a great place for me for a variety of reasons. Stretch a little and apply. Don't get scared away by imposter fears. So many times if I took turned on a tape, when I taped a student the first time I talked to them, oh, I will never get into that school. And then they come to say, I got in. So please, please consider stretching and applying, even if you think you might not get in, but you don't want to have a disappointing experience be unrealistic. And so we talk about reach schools and safe schools, and students say, well, how the hell do I know? And I generally say, you probably can't know and shouldn't know at this stage, but there are mentors who do know, and that you want to talk with your mentors. And you can read on the websites, you can talk to other people, but really you want to discuss this with mentors so that you don't go too far on the extreme of not applying to a realistic set of schools. But you don't want to go to the other side of the extreme and not give yourself a chance to get into the schools you really want to get into. This is a very stressful process. Waiting until last minute adds a huge amount of stress. And what happens when you wait till the last minute is you miss deadlines, you ask for extensions, and that does not make a good impression. And so one of the things we're going to do to have silver linings from this summer of not being able to do your internship for many of you is use it to get started on this process early. And so I talked about stress just a little bit. I just want to really reiterate how stressful this is. This is a competitive process with high stakes. You have to keep a lot going at one time, so you're juggling a lot of balls in the air: school, research, applications, interviews, work, life, like a lot happening in the midst of such an intense time that we're going through. For some of us, graduate admissions is a time to face past performance and other circumstances that can have a big impact on the admissions process. So we have to sit with those ouches, and the decision-making process can be really difficult. And there's both internal stressors, but external stressors. You're deciding between one school you really want to go to, but it's very far from your family, and your family is hoping you make a different choice. There's a whole lot of things coming at you during this process. So students who succeed, they understand and manage the process. They also focus on the stress of the process. So use every resource available to make a plan and follow it. Use family, friends, mentors, each other for support, and go back to our webinars on resilience and wellness and develop your resilience and wellness practice. And I want to end with one last slide, something I've been learning about lately. I spend a lot of time thinking about goal setting, and for whatever reason, the concept of SMART goals doesn't work for me myself. And I'm looking at setting some goals, and I found this literature on WHOOP, and I think it's fabulous. WHOOP is wish, outcome, obstacle, plan. The goal you want to accomplish is your W. I want to get into grad school. The outcome, what's a positive outcome of achieving that goal? This gives me all the access to research infrastructure I've been looking for, a chance to do research in this area. I've been dreaming about this now for several years, so the outcome, I feel proud. I have access to resources. That's sort of the fun part of the WHOOP. But then spend a moment and think about the obstacles. What WHOOP tries to do is connect your wishes with obstacles so that you make a plan. So the obstacles are obviously things that could get in the way. And then the P is for plan. And the way they recommend it, and I have found this so powerful for me, if X happens, I will do Y. Most of the research on using WHOOP was done by Gabrielle Ottingen. She works for the Character Lab. She's also a professor of psychology at NYU. And it's about health behaviors, but I see that it easily is translated to educational environments. And as part of the Character Lab, they do talk about using WHOOP in educational environments. So connect your wish with obstacles, think through all of the obstacles, and then make an if-then plan. If I start to have a lot of imposter fears and I procrastinate, I will talk to a friend or mentor. I will go to the student support group this week. If I get stuck in writing my research statement, I will revisit resources for scientific writing. If then. Okay, and I think that it's a great way to set some goals around preparing for graduate school. We have a huge number of upcoming workshops and events to help, from writing personal and research statements for grad school, networking, and then the Becoming a Resilient Scientist series. You have to watch the webinar to participate in the small group discussions. Tomorrow, our small group discussions on understanding cognitive distortions and imposter fears. It would be tough to jump in now, but the honest truth is, if you watch the webinar today, we could try to make that work. But 3, 4, and 5 are coming up: self-advocacy and assertiveness, feedback, resilience, and building mentor networks. This is a great way for you to prepare for graduate school by starting to experience finding community and using community. And then the virtual graduate and professional school fair is coming up. We also have a huge number of archived videos. Some are on our YouTube channel. We have a careers blog. We have lots of wellness resources. One resource missing here, and I apologize for that, I'll try to add it, is there's a set of interviews of really diverse graduate students and postdocs talking about finding support in through graduate school. And they talked about identity issues, being a grad student with kids, being a LGBT student, a student of color, first generation immigrant. And they just talked about how those identities both drove them in grad school, but occasionally were something they wanted to pause and reflect on, to take, to make sure to find support and not to get caught in imposter fears and sort of this feeling of disconnect. And so I'll make sure to add that. So with that, I am going to start questions. We have a good long time, which is really what I wanted. So let me get started.
Sharon, this
yeah.
is Natasha. I don't see the comments, but you might probably see them. So if you can start at 2:24, this timestamp, you can start with the questions. In the Q&A box.
Okay, yeah.
2:24.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Okay.
Should we include things we did this summer, online volunteering, virtual meetings on our CV? Yes, you should. You absolutely should. I mean, right now, all science is being done virtually. If you presented a virtual poster, it is the exact same as if you could have gone to a meeting. So you absolutely should put those things on your CV. Do you know much about dietitian programs? More specifically, how do you find, I'm sorry, but the second part of this, it must be missing a word. More specifically, how do you know what schools and how they rank? So like all programs, you want to find whatever you can about national education initiatives, right? So you would go ahead and Google dietitian programs nationally. You'll find probably a society or national organization of dietitians that will explain some things. Schools should be able to give you a sense of their rankings and what they're good at, and you would do all the things I talked about in terms of reaching out, asking questions, checking their website. I'm not sure how to evaluate my readiness to apply for PhD programs coming out of my postbac. I'm in my first year. I don't feel ready now, but if I apply this fall, I wouldn't start until a year later. How do you think about that? And that's a really great point, because you have to apply a year early, right? And so much growth is going to happen. I think the best way to navigate that is to find some mentors. Talk to some mentors who know you well, but also talk to some people like out of, since you're a postbac at NIH, out of the Career Center or one of us, Dr. Lugo Escobar or I, who talk a lot with people interested in graduate school. They'll ask you questions, you ask, you answer, you reflect. Some of us have a tendency to never think we're ready. And so having discussions with others can really help you see that you are. And so I would say that starts with talking with mentors and advisors. There's a question, what category does the NIH Academy fall under? I suppose that you're asking in terms of your CV, and that would be an educational experience. Are postbac programs funded? If not, are there resources to support oneself during the program? Research-oriented postbacs like the NIH PrEP program and the NIH Postbac ERDA program are both funded. Course-based postbacs that some people take because they want to go to medical school and need to get medical prerequisites done or have GPA issues, those you have to pay for. But if you're doing a research-based postbac, they are they will be paid for. What do you mean by classes without solid research is not useful when thinking about taking time to get ready? I mean, if you take 2 years off and you take classes and you don't do any research and then you apply for a PhD that involves research, people are going to say, how do you know if you really love research? You haven't been doing research in the last 2 years. And so what I mean by that is leading up to your application, it's really, really important that you be engaged in research. Is it a red flag that some institutions do not have lab rotations? I personally believe that it is in students' best interest to do lab rotations, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily a red flag. There are many educational systems, for example, in the European Union, where there is no tradition of lab rotations. And there are programs here in the US like clinical psychology where generally lab rotations don't happen. So I wouldn't say that it's a red flag, but when I talk to my own students about choosing programs, I point out what I see are what are the benefits of rotations, which is a chance to really check out the environment. It's also a real opportunity to let your interests change. So I already alluded to the fact that my interests really changed. I had a physical therapy degree, and so my motivation for going to graduate school was to study the neurobiology of strokes. And then I took this biochemistry class, which was required and which scared me because the teacher said, oh, if you've never had biochemistry before, you won't pass. So that was like a gift of imposter fears for me. And I was terrified of that class, but then I totally changed my entire graduate school experience. And if I had had to pick an advisor before that, I don't think I would have been as happy. So I'm a strong advocate for rotations, but there are lots of programs that don't have them and lots of reasons why you might choose a program without it. There's a lot of, you provided information on dimensions additional dimensions to consider when searching for programs. How can we find information on these when searching for schools? I understand asking while on the interview trail, but how do we find it out in advance? So, the website should have, maybe it has a link to a whole list of student affinity groups. Maybe it has a link to student wellness. Maybe advertised on their website is our community gathering to support each other during the pandemic, our virtual lunch today. Schools should have a website that advertises their career and wellness activities. They should talk about it in their recruitment material. And you can ask in advance at things like the grad fair. Talk a little bit about science, a little bit about the program, a little bit about, so how do you support students? This is a stressful time. How have you been taking care of your students? So that's how I think you can learn about it. Schools that are doing really great things within the wellness and resilience space, they are making sure that it's on their website. A, because they want students to be able to find it without having to ask. B, because they want applicants to know it exists, right? And C, because it's a part of their culture that we talk about wellness, right? Why would we be ashamed to say we take care of ourselves and our students, right? So we put the things we're proud of on our website. So you should be able to see it on different websites. What's your advice for navigating the welcoming and inclusive community piece when you're looking at a really homogeneous field like genetic counseling, right? Which is up to a few years ago, nearly 95% white. I think that it is an unfortunate truth about many academic fields that we really are lacking in diversity. And so I think one way is you look around, another way is you listen. You look at the curriculum and something like genetic counseling, you want to be able to provide really culturally competent counseling, which means you need to understand all of your unconscious and conscious biases. You need to know all your discomfort points, right? So that you can grow and learn and stretch. And so you look not only at the space around you, but you listen to the words around you. If students, if you look at the schedule and there's training, there's diversity training, there's safe zone training, there's discussion groups around systemic racism, if there's an anti-racism group on campus, that tells you, hoping that they are, fully supported by the institution. And if they're on the website, I think it's reasonable to assume that they are. That tells you that they care. So you look for things like that. Is it possible to start a PhD program at one place, get a stipend, and then drop out and try a second program you like better? Or does dropping out kill going anywhere else? I wouldn't say it kills going anywhere else, but it's very difficult. It is generally assumed if you left, something went really wrong. I think that it is not at all a good strategy to view the process in that way. That said, if you are miserable and you need to move, then you should talk to people and try to do it in the most respectful way possible. Is the policy that GRE is required but not important really quicksand and the applicant must do the best they can on the GRE no matter what the school says? No, quite frankly, if a school says we're not paying a lot of attention to the GREs, they mean we're not paying a lot of attention. I would encourage all of you to come to the fair prepared to ask some questions about the GREs, both at the panel discussion that we'll have, but also talking to individual schools, because I see a lot of stress in students where they intuit from the website that they really need to take it and they really need to do well, and they get really caught on this. And instead of working on an drop dead personal statement, getting some research done, taking care of other parts of the application, they get caught in a sort of negative cycle around the GREs. And so I encourage you to be really open in talking about that with schools. Regarding time to degree, is it appropriate to ask individual PIs about how long previous students have taken to get a degree? I've heard that in some programs it can vary from PI to PI. It does vary, and the honest truth is it's not always a negative reflection. I had students in my group who took a while longer because they were really close to a paper they wanted, or because they had a spouse or partner that was finishing up and this was a reasonable place to be. They were enjoying the science. It's not always negative. I think it's worth talking to individual PIs about time to degree, but I think it's more important to understand institutional policies, like who's in charge of the committee, right? Because if your PI is in charge of the committee, then it can be very, very hard if your PI is inflexible. It's important to know, are there regular committee meetings? Because nothing helps a student finish more than an active and engaged committee. And so I'm not so sure the most critical question is to the PI. The critical question is to the director of the graduate program, to students, to a set of PIs about, so what's the thought here about time to degree? So it's not quite only a number. I want to be a clinical neuropsychologist. I know I have to do a PhD. I was told I don't have to do a master's first and I can just go to PhD programs after undergrad. Do you know if this is true? I know that a number of people start clinical psych programs without getting a master's program. I know many more who did research at NIH as a postbac between undergrad and starting their PhD program, but I suspect that that advice that you're getting is accurate. What is the best way to handle GPA requirements, either on person or on an application itself, if you don't have that GPA? As somebody who didn't have the best of GPAs, I think the thing to do is deal with it, but not get totally caught up in it. Also, talk to somebody who's done this a lot, because sometimes people say to me, I want to talk about this huge elephant in the room, you know, that I have to deal with on my application. And I say, well, I'm looking at your GPA and research experiences. I'm not seeing anything alarming. And they're like, oh, but I had a B- in whatever, or I had one C, or I had one class that I had to drop and retake. You know, sometimes you see something as a major blemish and someone with experience looking at applications doesn't see it the same way. But if the honest truth is that your GPA is less than stellar and you have worked hard to learn the material and show that you're ready for grad school, you want to deal with that in a couple of ways. One is, if the application invites you to talk about anything in your record, sometimes there's a separate box. Is there anything you want to talk about? You can do it there. You can address it in your personal statement. You don't want to make it all about your GPA, but you can acknowledge what weaknesses you had and what you've done to remedy them. You can be prepared to talk about it at your interview, but I really encourage you to get some advice before you decide that this is a huge blemish. How would I rate my own graduate experience overall? I had a wonderful graduate school experience. I am incredibly thankful for my thesis advisor, who was a role model for me in so many different ways. I had some real bumps in graduate school at the start and some pretty profound imposter fears. And I had support of friends and community, and I look back in graduate school in a really positive light, which is ironic because I didn't get in the first time. I didn't pass my qualifying exams the first time. And if you took the resilience course, you heard the story of my first rotation. So the honest truth is I had some bumps, but it was a pretty wonderful experience. What is your advice for finding mentors in a narrow field? I'm interested in protozoal diseases and immunology, and there are only a few institutions with researchers working on projects in that field. Yeah, it's a really important thing. I talk about finding places where you have a lot of choices, you know, and factoring in all these other things, but then you have to hold, well, I want to work in a narrow field where there's excellence in these few places. And so I say, do your homework really hard in those few places. One thing, and I didn't talk about it here because it's not the topic, but when I talk about being successful in grad school, so for our postbacks leaving, I talk about that. I say, you know, there's lots of ways to get extra career development. If your school doesn't have something that's important to you, there are national societies that offer career development. The NIH OITE YouTube channel is just a rich source of information. There are community colleges that have great career programs. And so you look for the best school for you, and then you supplement what might be missing. However, if you do that homework at the beginning and you crystallize, so is teaching really important to me, that might help you choose between one school and another. And my gut feeling is if there's only a few schools, you apply to all of them that fit your geography, and you go with an open mind to all of them. Does it matter if you apply earlier by the deadline if the school uses rolling admissions, meaning they are evaluating things as they come in? Then it makes a big difference to be early. If they do not, then it is less important. Does the GRE subject test matter? It depends on the school. I suspect a few years from now there won't be very many subject tests happening, but we'll have to see. If you have a low GPA, how much will that affect you as a candidate? It depends on how low. It depends on whether you started out with a really bumpy beginning and improved. It depends on if there was a health reason or a family crisis type reason. It depends what research you've done. It depends on how you talk about it. It depends on a lot of things. And I find that people with worries about their GPA really need to get advice. They need to spread the range of schools, because there are some schools that really use a holistic review, and there are some schools that say, well, we look at everybody, but really, you know, that GPA isn't going to cut it. So it's worth really having a serious discussion. And it's not just your GPA, it's what classes. So I've seen people with a pretty good GPA, but not great grades in science. And I've seen people with a lower GPA, but their science grades were really, really good. So it depends. There's so much nuance to this that you want to talk to mentors. For letters of recommendation, is the best case scenario for you to have 3 letters from research PIs, or are course professors okay? Absolutely, course professors are better than okay. They are absolutely fine. And it is not necessary to have 3 research-focused letters. But if you only have 1 summer research experience, but your school emphasized course-embedded research in labs, would that be enough research experience? Some people will say yes, that could be enough experience. I personally, as somebody who has talked to, I don't know how many postbacks and undergrads and summer interns, I guess I would encourage you to take a deep breath and not be worried about taking a gap year to do research full time. You know, parents always tell students, oh, if you leave school, you won't go back. And, you know, I understand that because my son is taking some time. And sometimes I worry about him and whether he goes back. And then I take a deep breath and realize it's his life and he'll decide, right? There's no data to say that postbacks don't go back. In fact, there's data to say that people who take time off often go back stronger and better prepared. And to me, 1 summer research experience is not enough to be certain that this is what you want to do. So I would encourage you to be open to taking time off, and not time off, time to do research. I have seen programs where there is a stipend, but then they mention that you can apply for assistantships. Does that mean you could be paid extra if you choose or apply to do extra teaching? I'm going to say that you need to answer those schools. because in some schools, what that is that there's a stipend for 9 months, and then you apply for an assistantship to cover the rest of it. In some schools, they provide a stipend for a certain number of years, and then you have to apply for a teaching assistantship or a research assistantship. And I think the idea of being financially secure is important enough that you should check with every school. How does coursework work during research? Do you do it in parallel? Most schools have you taking classes in your first year while doing rotations, but there are a few programs that do it differently. So again, as you are talking to schools, you're going to want to ask questions about that and make sure you fully understand. But generally, yes, you're doing it in parallel, which means there's a lot to juggle. T32s are awarded to the institution, but you mentioned that we can end up applying for funding from that. Like X university has a T32, and to get those funds, you specifically as a student at X university apply. That is correct. That is how it works at many places. So they'll send out an email to all of the students and say, we're taking applications to be a part of the cancer cell biology T32. Occasionally it's different. Your PI applies for you. Occasionally first year students are just put on T32s. So again, my goal today was to help you know to ask questions. So if somebody says we have a T32, you'll know to say, oh, how does that one work here, right? Do I have to apply for that? Okay. I have a list of PIs at a school that are interesting to me without asking all of them directly as a way to find out if they will have funding to take new students. So I personally think it can be a huge time sink to email lots of PIs and express an interest. And there's a lot of uncertainty always, but especially now. So asking a PI now, do you think you might take a student in 2022, right? Because you would probably join a lab in 2022, I think is not a great use of your time. Also, PIs sometimes say, you're a great applicant, go ahead, but they're not on the admissions committee, and so they don't have a lot to do with the process, and so you get some misleading information. When you look on the website, you want to look at the process of how people find labs and what does it say about money. Some programs provide 2 years of money, makes it much easier to find someone who can take you. Some say you have to match with somebody with money right away. And that's one of these sort of intangible things that you're going to have to look at later, you know, as you're navigating all of this, especially if the economy seems really rough and money's tight. And it might be the reality is that you don't get to work with your first choice person because of that. But perhaps you'll find a school with a T32. Perhaps you will find a way to collaborate. I mean, my gut feeling is, and it's always the case, not just now, but my gut feeling is that money will sometimes be an issue for a PI, but there's no way to find that out now. Do you have tips and tricks for getting in touch with PIs or grad students at potential grad schools and how to write those out of the blue emails? And so, like I said, I am not a huge fan of a lot of out of the blue emails to PIs unless this is a field where you have to pick up front, in which case you absolutely need to send those emails. And the way to do that is to introduce yourself, explain in the first few sentences why you're reaching out. I am writing to get information about research opportunities for PhD students in your group. Summarize a little bit about you and ask for a chance to talk by Zoom or Skype or phone. If you don't get an answer and it's someone you really want to work with, send another email. If you don't get an answer after 2 emails, you can decide whether to try a third, but generally you've just gotten the answer, and that is that they're not interested right now. How many schools is a good number to apply to? I like to say no more than 8. I think 8 is a lot. MD, PhD applies for more. Clinical psych applies for more. So there are nuances to this where you want to get really discipline-specific mentorship. I like to say that 8 interviews is exhausting. Now, here's an interesting possibility. If all interviews are remote this year, you might think about applying to more schools. However, it's still an effort. You still have to prepare. And so to me, you don't want to spend so much time on this that it's a distraction from everything else. And we'll just have to see what happens. I mean, hopefully there will be in-person interviews, although I imagine that there'll be a fair amount of pre-interviews virtually, and it may be that there are, depending on what happens and how this evolves, it may be that the interviews also are virtually. There's a question about whether publications are important, and they certainly are helpful. Many people get into graduate school without publications. If you are on the road towards a publication, it helps if your mentor mentions that, but lots of people get into grad school without publications. All things being equal, the more competitive the program is, the more likely it is that they are paying careful attention to that. It would be helpful if you would go into more depth about what is and is not a good question at the grad fair. We'll be sending out some information on that. You want to ask serious questions about the science, the resources, the educational and career infrastructure, and not as much about, is there sailing? Oh, it's close to the ocean, does everybody go to the beach all the time? You want to convey that you're interested in the science there. You can ask questions about career outcomes. All of those are good questions. When is the recommended time to start the formal application process? When should I start my essays? The honest truth is that often I would say not until later in the summer. But this year, if you're doing just a virtual internship and you have time, I suspect it's a good idea to get started now, to feel productive a little bit. And I do think that there's something to be said for doing behaviors that make us feel like we're moving forward right now. But B, with the hopes that things are going to get back to normal and we're all going to get busier at some point, right? And so you don't want to be doing it last minute when you're finally allowed back and working. And so I would really encourage you to start now. Generally, though, I tell people August, September is the time to start. I did summer research last summer, and I'm at NIH now. My science classes at school also have labs, but I can only name 2 people to help with recommendations that pertain to science. So I think that you could think about adding a teacher. You also could really look at the postbac program and decide, is this telling me something, right? And is this telling me that a little bit more science could be really, really helpful? I am a huge advocate of people taking time off because I see so many of our postbacs grow and evolve and really crystallize what they love about science, or really decide what they don't love about science and they find something else that they want to do. And quite frankly, both of those are victories. Some people know they want to get a PhD, but they change fields. Some people are really undecided about MD, PhD, or PhD or an MD, and the year gives them a chance to really decide. And so I guess I would say if you don't feel like you have a lot of ability to talk to, it's easy to think about people writing letters. Maybe that's telling you that a little bit more research experience would help. Maybe you're thinking too narrowly, and so you'll need to talk with some mentors. I'm having difficulty identifying programs. My background is in social science, but my work at NIH and emerging interests are in genetics. I want to work on health disparities and how social and behavioral factors impact biology through epigenetics leading to disease. And it goes on, and it's really a great question, and I'd love to chat with you a little bit. I'm going to leave out the rest of the question because I think I can head in the direction you want to hear. And that is that some of you are at really unique and interesting interfaces, right? Where you could go in the direction of a broad-minded genomics program, or in the direction of a public health program, or a social psychology program. And I think that those are really interesting opportunities, and the thing to do is to do more informational interviews with people who are doing things that really interest you. And I know I see here you go on to say, I'm worried that more medical schools won't value my social science background. And you know, that's a little bit of the cognitive distortion of mind reading. And you're right, some might not value, but some will totally value, because what are we learning from this pandemic? We are learning that the disconnect between the hard sciences and the social sciences really got in the way. We are learning that health disparities are rooted in so many systemic issues in our country. We are learning that it is going to take highly interdisciplinary people to tackle the problems we're dealing with. So you might find schools that love your background. In fact, I have been on committees where people have been all excited about people with non-traditional backgrounds. But it will take a while for you to find the right programs, and you have some time this summer to work on it. Is it a disadvantage if I choose my STEM major during my sophomore year and I'm a little bit behind in classes? Absolutely not. It will not matter one bit. I know people who changed their major in junior year. They're doing great in grad school. Absolutely not a problem. How competitive would I be in applying to PhD programs with only 2 to 3 semesters of research? It depends on how intense that research is. It depends on how much time you are able to spend during school. There's a lot of it depends on deciding, do I have enough research experience to head into a PhD program? That said, the more competitive things are, the more schools can choose people with a substantial amount of research. And so I think that those of you who are wondering, do I have enough? You might really embrace the concept of taking some time to do a postbac. What advice do you have for recent graduates who had planned on medical school, but have realized that graduate school suits their interests better, but they don't have research experience? I would say one word to that: postbac. And we have lots of people in postbac programs just like that. You know, so many people, it's like you're little and you go to the doctor and somebody who really cares about you says, see, you love science, you can do that too, right? People give out, you know, doctor dolls. They don't give out scientist dolls. So many of us got messages, many of you got messages that med school, right? And part of that, you know, it may be that that's what you want to do. And it may be that you have an awakening that you don't. And that's very common and really okay. And in fact, it's a wonderful thing to figure out what you want. But you'll need to do some serious research. Is there a list of schools that will be present at the grad fair? Yes, somewhere on our website. I don't know if it's there yet. Yewan will let me know if it is, and if not, just keep checking back. It will be there soon. How do you request? It is. Thank you.
It is not updated yet, but we are working on it. So hopefully we can update next week.
All right, so it'll be up there next week. We still have lots of time. The honest truth is we have one more major event before the grad fair. So we have a Train the Trainers event on health and wellness of graduate students. So our office is incredibly busy, and so many schools responded yes to the fair. So it's going to take us some time. How do you request informational interviews? There is going to be a webinar on informational interviews, and you request them by email. You send an email and you tell the person you'd really love to talk with them about their career or their graduate program, and you wait for an answer, and often you get it. You can ask on LinkedIn. Some of us are on LinkedIn, some of us are not. Lots of people, I feel really bad. I find all these requests for informational interviews on LinkedIn, but I only open it like once every 4 months. So people must think, oh, she's rude, right? So you want to try email, but you can also try LinkedIn. Can you commit on how the experience of graduate school in a non-university setting differs from graduate school at a university? For example, maybe at a standalone medical school, maybe government, like go into grad school at NIH. You know, I guess what I would say is that there's an element of campus life that sometimes is missing, right? Sports teams and clubs and a big gym, those things can be missing. There can be fewer students around. There's less of a feeling of semesters. There's no such thing as necessarily fall break or spring break. And so there are some things about sort of the ebb and flow of a calendar that doesn't happen. It can feel very educational though. Lots of standalone med schools. NIH feels to me a lot like an academic institution, but no basketball team. The environment is a little bit less student oriented. And that'll be a good question for you to ask as you are talking to people. My staff scientist mentor knows me best. Is it rude to my mentor to ask my PI to co-sign the letter? I think that if you have a nice relationship with your staff scientist, it would be really great to say, so I'm getting set to apply to grad school and I wanted to get your input on a letter. You really know me best and I will be honored if you write me a letter. At the webinar, I heard that it's always good to have a letter from your PI as well. What do you think about that? And I can tell you, because I work with tons of staff scientists and talk to them a lot, that they want the best for you and they generally know exactly how to handle it in their lab. And in some cases, they write the letter and co-sign it. In some cases, they write the letter, the PI signs it. But if they know you and want the best of you, they will be happy to have that conversation with you. And I already answered the number of grad schools. How do you find good potential mentors? I mean, I don't really know how many publications or fame is identified as good. So first of all, I don't even know what I think about responding to the idea of fame. And I thank you for putting that out there, because there is this feeling of I have to work with someone famous to get ahead. But there are so many exceptional scientists. Fame in science is a funny thing, because you can be incredibly influential in a small field and you might not use the word fame for that, but it could be such an amazing place to train. Also, science is not a field really driven by things like that. And so I think that you want to look for quality publications. You don't want to pay attention only to the name of the journal. You want to look that students and postdocs and others are publishing as first author, how many papers are coming out. I think you really want to get a sense of the environment in the lab. Of course, you can't tell that online. That's once you get there and talk about rotations. But you want to look at many, many things. And the truth about publications is, in some fields, one publication for a graduate student, could take years and years, and it could be a graduate student in another department where the publications are, they're shorter, smaller. So you get a lot of publications. And so there is no magic number. It depends on the field. And so you want to talk to mentors. What advice do you have for people deciding between graduate school and research and medical school? Yeah. So the advice that I have there is to sit for a good long time and be certain that you've looked at all the pressures pushing you one way or the other, that you have done enough in the patient care arena to know if you enjoy patient care, that you've done enough in the research arena to know that you enjoy that. Often when students are undecided, there's two things going on. And one is, what do I really want to do? And the other is, what are all the external stressors pushing me in one direction or another? And sometimes just, you have to name it to tame it. So just by pointing out pressure from my family is really making this hard, even that just helps a little, right? Just pointing it out, just saying it, just talking it through can help. And so you need to look at two things in that regard. Where is the pressures coming from? How is that impacting my decision? What do I know about these two things? And how can I navigate through that? So talking with career counselors, with career mentors, going to multiple appointments and talking it through. If you are not accepted into a PhD program, is it frowned upon to reapply to the same school the following year? Absolutely not. It is not frowned upon at all. I, in fact, did get into some schools that I applied to the second time around. I applied also the first time. I know of many, many NIH postbacks that I've mentored who didn't get into a school, talked to that school, got feedback about what was not right, reapplied, and hit the sweet spot the second time around. You mentioned an NIH postbac alumni list of people we can contact. Can you mention that again? So if you are currently at NIH as a postbac, if you go to the OITE website, there's an alumni database. If you are currently a student at another school, you will want to check for alumni databases at that school. But if you're at NIH, you can go to our website and find it. You mentioned that many PhD programs are structured as preparation to become professors. I personally do not want to go to academia. Is there a danger during admissions of mentioning wanting to go into industry? You know, I think that it's actually a hugely advantageous thing to mention, because you want to find a school that supports that. You want to find a school that's providing you with access to people in industry, where you might even be able to do industry visits, or you know, there's so many industry seminar speakers that you've cultivated a whole lot of networks in industry. Now, some schools have a very open view of career development and, you know, and career choices, and they view all career outcomes as positive. That doesn't mean every PI at that school feels that way. So I think you mention what you want to do and you watch for responses, and you learn whether that's a good supportive school or not. You learn whether that's a good supportive PI or not. But you know, the data say all of you will choose a variety of career paths, and wouldn't it be nice for you to be at a school that supports that, right? That runs an industry club. At NIH, we have a science policy club, right? It's a leg up for people looking for science policy jobs to participate in the science policy, you know, club. And so you want to, I think you want to talk about it, so you find a supportive school. Can talking to a program director about your application hurt you? It cannot hurt you unless you talk unprepared, right? Don't show up at the grad fair unprepared. Practice your your description about yourself. Make sure that you have thought through what you want to ask. It only can help. Have the links for the next discussion been sent out? If you're talking about the resilience discussion, it has been sent out, and you can email me and I'll help you figure out what happened. Can I do a PhD in public health without doing an MPH? Yes, you can. I have mentored many students who have gone directly that way. Many of them have important experiences in the community doing public health work. And so it's important to make sure that you have public health work. You'll want to ask schools, am I competitive as a PhD candidate now or not? And they should give you a nice, honest answer. Is it appropriate to have a letter of recommendation from a peer in an undergraduate research lab? That would not be the best of choices, and I would not encourage you to do that. Where can I find the links you just showed? I think that must be to the different webinars. They are all on our website. Can I include webinars on my CV, ones that were like online conferences? I think if it was an online conference that you attended, like you went to the experimental biology online conference, virtual conference, you should do that. If you went to a webinar on informational interviews, I don't think you necessarily should list that on your CV. That said, as you are talking in your essay about this year's experience in the pandemic, I think it's valuable to say, I did everything I could to stretch and learn, including these types of webinars. You know, if you did the entire resilience series, I do think that you should put that on your application. You'll take it off at the next step in your career, but to get into school to show that you've learned this material could be really helpful. How do admissions committees evaluate your past research? What are they looking for? How should we discuss it? They'll talk a lot about that in the webinar next week. We're looking at how independent you were, whether you understand what you did. Can you describe both the big picture and answer some questions about details? Do you understand the broader context? We evaluated in part by the letters of recommendation. We evaluated in part by, did you ever present about it? So it's both how you talk about it, how you write about it, and what we hear about it. How can we add this program to our application? If you apply to the NIH summer internship program this summer and were accepted, You should put that under probably, I think I would put it under internship experiences, and I would say 2020 NIH summer internship program, admitted, program canceled, and completed online. I think that's how I would do it. There's also some great webinars that some of our career counselors have done, and they're better experts at that than I am, so they might have a different opinion. And you'll ask people and say, is the way I talked about this make sense to you? What are some good websites and places to find virtual journal clubs? That's a great question, and I don't fully know the answer to that. I would check at your own undergraduate institution. You might look at some of the scientific societies. They might have something that would be helpful there. And a lesson to me, I should have looked that up. If your cumulative GPA and major GPA are different, like you have a cumulative low GPA and a much higher major GPA due to circumstances like health, how do you share that without going into too much information, without giving a lot of detail? You simply mention that my grades were very low this semester because I had an illness, and that, you know, I really focused on my science classes and feel prepared. How are career changers perceived? Very welcome. There are career changers in most graduate programs. You'll want to talk about what motivated that career change. Is it important to be a member of professional organizations? I don't think that is an especially important thing, but it certainly never hurts. So if there's an organization that you're a member of and it's really value added, you should list it. But you don't have to go out and find one just because. PhD applications require recommenders to make an account and follow multiple steps before they can submit recommendations, which is a lot of work for a professor, especially if you're applying to multiple programs. What is the best strategy to deal with? It's actually not so bad. I write, I don't know how many applications each year. It's a part of our responsibility to our students. So you do your best to make it easy for them. You send them a list. You send them a summary of what your experiences were. You remind them, you're very courteous. You thank them when they're a little bit late. You remind them again. But, you know, it is just what it is. And the honest truth is most of us write one letter and we just upload it again and again. Can you discuss how gap time in between undergrad and grad school reflects on an applicant? If you are doing research, it looks really fabulous. If you just took a break and you weren't doing something research related, some schools will wonder about that if it was a long break, and you might need to do a little bit of research towards the end of that gap. But sometimes we really need a break. Sometimes something's happening in our life and we have to attend to it. I go to a small school and have been working on independent research, so it's not as fast as working in a group. Will this hurt me? You know, many of us don't really expect there to be a lot accomplished. We want to know about the quality of the experience. And so if you had a really quality experience, even if it went slow, we will be very, very interested in hearing about that. I started working in a research lab as a freshman. As a result, I didn't grow as close to professors from classes because I already had a strong mentoring network. I have some ideas of where rec letters could come from, but I'm worried because I wasn't extremely close, the letters won't be as competitive. Yeah, but you'll get some letters really from people who know you really well in the research arena, and it'll be okay. Lots of, I mean, we're not, you know, most of us have been doing this a long time, and we know that it can be very hard to get to know professors at large universities. We know that professors are busy and aren't always so responsive. And so I would encourage you not to be so worried, focus on the absolute best. I'm thinking of getting a master's in molecular biology, but I've also been thinking about getting a PhD. Is it worth doing a master's? It really depends what your career goals are. It depends on what the motivation for getting a master's was. And so that would take some discussion. You know, certainly in computational biology, a master's is more than enough to get an outstanding job. It goes a lot faster. you get on the job market and into a high-paying job much faster. So there are reasons for not getting a PhD. You just need to ask yourself, do I want to be a professor or do I want to be in charge? Because then having a PhD might be really, really important. So it is 4:11. I'm going to take a few more questions. We've gone way over, but we have this Q&A. So, we'll have another chance to answer questions. If you get an offer from a program, is it customary to defer the offer to another year if you don't feel ready? Some schools will defer and some schools will not. And so it's really, really important that you apply with the intention of going, because you don't want to be really disappointed that you all along were applying with the thought that you want to defer, and you tell the school you want to defer and they say, fine, reapply next year. It is not common, and that doesn't mean the answer will be no, but you want to be certain. As a person with disabilities who receives accommodation in undergrad, how do I approach that topic with a graduate program, sharing my need for considerations without making myself seem weak or needy? I think that it's important for you to be very matter of fact, right? You've succeeded in undergrad, and it is your right to have these accommodations, and you want to make sure that you find a graduate program that sees you for who you are and embraces supporting you through that process. Each and every person has to decide what they share in their application versus what they share at an interview. And some things obviously we have to share because they're visible, right? Some of our identities are hidden, but some of them are visible for all to see. You get a choice to decide what to share, how to share, what kinds of details to share. But what you're really looking for is a school that says, thank you for letting us know, and here's our views of how we can support you through this experience. We know you'll enhance our community. Thank you for applying. You can have people read it, but my guess is that, because I know how hard it can be and how many microaggressions there are directed at people who are perceived as different, my gut feeling is that you have a clear way of talking about this. And it's just a matter of putting it on paper and talking it through with some mentors. But you really should be welcomed by schools. Can you comment on how the experience of graduate school, I somehow didn't erase that one, I already answered that. Is it a bad sign for a school if you don't get a publication out of a postbac? I addressed that a little bit. It's really not. It's nice to have a publication, but it is not absolutely required. Is it better to have one long, in-depth research experience or to go different places every summer? I said I would talk about things where I thought there was general agreement. I'm going to point out here that I suspect there are program directors who would answer this different than I would. I'm going to say that it doesn't matter. I'm going to say that if you have a really positive experience one place and you stay around for a while, that's a pretty good thing. I'm also going to say if you want to explore different things and you do a different thing every summer, that's a pretty good thing. All things being equal, we're looking at the quality of the experience. And while I could say, well, wouldn't it be great that you had at least 2 different experiences? Who am I to judge what made you choose to stay or not? So I think that if it's a really valuable experience and you are learning and growing, staying at the same place is fine. If you are not learning and growing and it just is comfortable, then you need a kick in the butt and to move on. All right, so that's how I would answer that one. Do PhD students pay for their tuition and get paid at the same time? How does that work? Many schools pay your tuition for you, but not all schools. And this is a part of the homework you need to do. You all need to go home and make a spreadsheet, and it needs to have information about every school, including the financial package. But many schools give you what's called a tuition remission, which means that you're not charged out of state tuition and your program pays the tuition on your behalf, or the NIH pays the tuition on your behalf. So I am really sorry, but I have another meeting that starts at 4:15. And I feel like we went through a lot of questions. I am energized by all of the great questions that you all have. We will be back in 2 weeks to answer more questions. Next week, we'll talk about personal statements. You give me great hope for the future. You're clearly all thinking about this so seriously and working really hard to get where you want to go. So thank you, everybody. And please, if you're not participating in the resilience program, start participating. It's really a great experience and information that you need to hear again and again. Thank you all very, very much, and take care.